Episode 28, 25, For the Dragons. Chapter 25, For the Dragons. A shrine sat upon a grand staircase, gazing long at the golden sky, away from the setting sun. From within, the shining portal took a glimpse of the spectacular view outside. Broken walls of stone sat forlornly upon the dry barren ground, arranged haphazardly around the shrine, and an empty well, with its square opening gazing upward at the darkening sky, stood among the stones, marking the beginning of the stone path that led to the exit of the place. The travelers could tell that this was once a magnificent place, with splendid grandeur of a past already forgotten. But now, all that remained was an abandoned broken ruin. But not for Ryu. To him, it was a familiar place, with memories of the past still firmly attached to his mind. Despite the definite gloom that hung in the air, feelings of nostalgia washed over him, and an old memory crept slowly into his mind.
Ryu! Get back here at once!
A young woman shouted, the tone of her voice drawing attention from the other villagers. Her white priestess robe dragged behind her as she walked briskly, her long azure hair dancing around the hem. Yet the expression she wore on her face was less than amicable.
Naya, you're not gonna drag me back in there, Sarah!
A short teenager cried and stuck out his tongue. A cheeky grin was etched onto his face, with messy, unkempt blue hair brushing against his shoulders, and his clothes were partly covered in dirt.
Wait until I get you, you! Ooh! What did I do to deserve this?
In a burst of anger, Sarah disappeared away in a great flash of light. And in her place was a golden dragon. His grin immediately disappeared.
Oh, I forgot about that. Wargh.
He turned and sped away as fast as his legs could carry him, but human legs were no match for a dragon's great wings. Within moments, he was laying face down on the ground, with the young woman, back in her human form, sitting on his back.
Yow! Get off me, Sarah!
Ryu cried, flailing his arms in his struggle.
I've been very civil with you like how an actual priestess.
She crossed her arms in indignation.
But no, you just had to push your luck like the annoying little bug of a brother. All right. I'm sorry. I'll finish my lessons like a good boy, okay? Now get off me.
Nodding, she got to her feet and moments later, they were both standing and dusting the dirt off their clothes. However, now Sarah had a triumphant look on her face, while Ryu sulked.
Man, it's not fair.
The young boy grumbled.
How come you get to turn into a dragon, but I don't?
His older sister did not immediately reply. Instead, a complete change took over her expression, her eyes dull with sadness. Noticing the change in her, he gazed at her in concern.
Sarah? Ryu, when will you learn?
She sighed.
You know, of all the light dragons in this village, only both of us have the power to turn into dragons. The others have renounced it. I know that, but I still wanna.
Her expression hardened.
Because of that, with this power comes a great responsibility. Are you ready to shoulder all that responsibility yet, Ryu?
He was taken aback by the sudden harsh tone in her voice.
Aye.
She sighed again, looking sad once more.
Oh, Ryu, you silly boy.
Then, she abruptly embraced him. Ryu's eyes widened in surprise.
Sarah? Whatever happens, Ryu, uphold your responsibility as a proud member of the Light Dragon clan.
She smiled slightly.
And, most of all, protect those you love most.
He returned the embrace, closing his eyes.
I will, Sarah. I promise you that. Ryu.
Nina called him, concern showing on her face.
The
dragon blinked.
Oh. Sorry. I was recalling an old memory. A memory?
Momo asked.
Of what?
Ryu stared off into the blue sky, a distant look in his eyes.
During my first life, I lived here in this village with my older sister, Sarah. Though back then, there were so many of us dragons that we were divided into clans. I was in the Light Dragon clan.
He closed his eyes.
This village, Dragnir, used to be a secluded village near the sea, with lots of grass and trees.
Nina placed a comforting hand on his shoulder.
Ryu.
Shaking his head, he smiled a little.
Don't worry about me.
The guardian, who had been silent until now, abruptly spoke.
You say this was a dragon village? A village full of dragons?
Ray rubbed the back of his head.
Man, it's a scary thought.
Ryu nodded.
I'm not sure if there's anyone here now. But there's only one way to find out.
With that, he began stepping down the staircase, and the others followed suit. It was a strange feeling, entering a village that had changed so much to the point it was like a different place, yet familiar enough for him to instinctively know which direction led where. In his mind, all his memories of visiting Dragnir appeared once more, and the changes that the village had gone through over the centuries were apparent in his mind. But he had never seen it this bleak, this gloomy before. At the bottom of the staircase was a more populated area of the village, filled with a small number of people who had made tents, formed by draping large cloth over two partially broken walls, their home. But what was surprising was the fact that there were only the elderly here, some wielding walking sticks and some so hunched that their heads were level with their shoulders. They all had dull silver hair that no longer shone, and they moved in a manner that showed no enthusiasm, as though life was dreary. Ryu could only stare, stunned. What happened to the lively community? What happened to all the children, the adolescents, the adults that still had years to live? What happened to the dignified dragons? Ryu steeled his heart and stepped forward, determined to find out what had happened to his brethrens. At the sound of his footsteps, the elderly villagers looked up slowly. However, as soon as they had set their eyes on Ryu and his azure hair, they all froze in their tracks, their formerly dull eyes wide open with shock.
I don't believe it.
One old woman muttered. An old man shook his head.
That blue hair, it must be him. It has to be.
As they all muttered and whispered among themselves, they gathered around the travelers, with a look of awe and wonder upon their faces. Ryu felt like an animal on display, but nonetheless he stood silently, patiently waiting. If his arrival piqued their interest, they would most certainly call their leader. After some time, the crowd parted to let an old man through. It was an old man not unlike the others. He was almost completely bald except for a few strands of hair, and there was a white mustache on his face. The moment he set his eyes on Ryu, his eyes widened, first with shock, then with excitement.
"What's this?"
He turned towards his fellow villagers.
"Everyone! We must celebrate!"
Abruptly, the crowd broke out into a cheer and they all shuffled away, in an excited manner that was different from their slow, unenthusiastic movements earlier.
"Huh? What?"
was Rei's reaction. Momo shrugged, puzzled as well. Engar stood tall, his arms crossed, his expression harsh. Once everyone had disappeared, the remaining old man, who had earlier cried they should celebrate, approached Ryu and gave a respectful bow.
"Welcome back, Lord Ryu,"
he said in respect.
"We have long awaited your return."
Ryu returned the bow, apparently unsurprised.
"I'm glad to return, Master." "Grial, Lord Ryu. I am the patriarch of this village."
He shook his head.
"But please, I am unworthy of the title."
He shook his head, ignoring the last statement.
"Master Grial, since you're the head here, maybe you can explain."
He glanced around the village.
"What happened here in the last 400 years?
Grial shook his head slowly.
Do not worry, we will have time to talk later. You must be exhausted from your journey."
He gestured towards a particular tent.
"Now, if you would come with me, I will show you and your companions your rooms. Please, this way." "Okay, tell us what's going on,"
the half-tiger demanded later in their room, crossing his arms.
"Yes, please explain, Ryu."
Nina shook her head.
"We're all confused."
Pico nodded.
Phew. "Well, actually,"
Ryu started, rubbing the back of his head.
"I don't know what's going on any more than you are. But it doesn't surprise me, because there's always been someone waiting for me to return to lead the warriors against Myria again. Except there are no warriors this time." "Are you going to be fighting the goddess on your own?"
Nina asked. He nodded.
"Most likely."
His expression rather grim, Gar did not answer. The crowd shushed as the group entered banquet area, which was held in the biggest tent in the village. The tent was bare except for a large straw mat on the floor and a few cupboards here and there, and on the mat were dishes and dishes of food enough to feed an army. The residents of this village had certainly outdone themselves. Once the 6 of them had taken their seats and settled down, Grial cleared his throat.
"Please, be at ease," he started. "These are the food prepared by the people of this village, Lord Ryu. We hope that they will be to your liking."
Ryu felt embarrassed at all the show of respect.
Thanks, Master Grial, though you didn't have to go through all the trouble." "Nonsense!"
an old woman cried.
"We loved doing it for you, my lord." "You may ask for anything at all, Lord Ryu,"
another man added.
"Anything at all." "Well, in that case..."
Ryu hesitated.
"Please tell me what happened in the past 400 years. I'm afraid I haven't been up with the times." Ah, yes.
Grial stroked his mustache, seeming thoughtful.
We were once like you, Lord Ryu. We once had the power bestowed upon our clan. But
he shook his head sadly with a sigh.
We gave up our powers and fled here during the Great War.
Upon seeing Gar's tense demeanor, he spoke.
So do not be alarmed, Guardian.
Gar's expression remained unchanged as he spoke.
You came here so that we Guardians would be able to find you, not?
It was not an inquiry, but more of a statement. One woman gave a sudden cackle.
He. Exactly. All preparation for this moment. This moment?
Nina asked confusedly.
You will know soon enough.
Grial stated.
But for now, please rest and be at ease, my lord and noble companions. Please try the meat,
another old woman said hospitably.
It will restore the strength sapped by the desert's heat. Thank you,
Ryu said awkwardly.
Well, in that case.
Ray grinned, his eyes shining as he gazed at the food.
Let's dig in.
He was the only enthusiastic one in the group, however. The others gazed at each other, not quite sure how to react.
Nina?
He strode along the paths through the bleak village of Dragnir, between the broken walls, searching for his companions.
Ray? Momo?
He stopped.
Gar? Pico?
The streets seemed strangely empty. Strangely dark.
Everyone? We have been awaiting your coming, Lord Ryu, Prince of the Dragons.
A cracked voice suddenly spoke from behind him, startling him.
It has been foretold for many centuries. Are really?
Ryu asked, beginning to feel nervous.
Yes, Lord Ryu.
Another voice came from his right.
After our enemies defeated us, they tried to wipe us from the face of earth.
A third voice, this time from his left, continued.
To survive, our people either had to give up their power like we have, or bury themselves deep, deep underground. Our brethren who hid underground. Many of them entered a deep sleep after conceiving a child. They slept, to await the time when one day, the brood might walk the earth again. And now, that day has arrived.
Yet another voice cried.
The prince is soon to awaken.
All the voices cheered loudly, enthusiastically, as though they were at a competition rather than in a conversation with Ryu. There was a strange tone of excitement in their voices. Of anticipation of a great happening. Then, they all quieted down as Grial cleared his throat.
Lord Ryu, Destined One.
He began.
You have come here. To the forgotten city of the brood, Dragnir. Call it destiny if you will. We can tell you where to find what it is that you are seeking. Where to find your foe, the goddess Miria. Lord Ryu.
All the voices called out to him, beckoningly.
Lord Ryu. No.
Ryu shook his head, trying to shut out the voices. For the first time in his life, he feared his own clan. Suddenly, heavy energy surrounded him, trying to overwhelm him.
Lord Ryu, you must awaken to your true power.
Another voice commanded.
And then, you must face the goddess. No. No.
Ryu cried, his eyes wide with fear, his heart racing.
Ryu?
Nina, who sat beside him, said in surprised.
Are you okay? You look tense. What?
He gazed at her in confusion, and then he sat up quickly, looking around. They were still in the room where they had the banquet, though all the dishes had been cleared and everyone had gone out, except for Nina who had chosen to accompany him.
You fell asleep after the banquet, Ryu,
the princess explained.
Oh. Okay.
He lowered his head, placing a hand over his eyes. His heart was still banging against his chest, his breathing rapid, and cold sweat slid down his face. She watched him in concern.
Are you really okay? Yeah. Yeah, I am.
He shook his head slowly.
It's just a dream.
He took a few deep breaths and began to feel calmer.
Where's everyone else, Nina? Everyone? They're outside somewhere, though I'm not sure where. I see.
Feeling drained despite the short nap, he leaned back against the cupboard. For a long time, before he regained his memories, he had always longed of a family, to be reunited with his brethren. To belong to someone. But now that he had returned to his hometown, it was not what he had expected. A feeling of dread took over him, rather than the excitement of reunion. A feeling of fear shot across his heart, rather than the satisfaction of accomplishing one of his goals. His people were no longer the ones he had grown to know over the years. All that was left were the remnants of the glorious past, and people who would do anything to regain it. And it scared him.
Ryu.
Nina called, her voice soft.
Is there something wrong?
Having snapped out of his thoughts, he jumped a little. He had forgotten for a moment that she was still there. With him. Suddenly, thoughts of him going up against the goddess with her at his side intruded his mind. Visions of her dying, of him screaming, because he had failed to protect her. No, he couldn't let that happen.
Nina.
He closed his eyes.
This time it's going to be different. There are no more warriors for me to lead against Miria, and I'll be going alone.
He shook his head.
There's no guarantee that I can protect you. Or that I won't die. Ryu.
He closed his eyes, pain showing on his face.
This is my destiny. I shouldn't drag you into this. That's why. Oh, Ryu.
She embraced him.
When will you stop tormenting yourself?
He was startled.
Nina. You should remember that you're not alone. I'm here for you. We're all here for you.
She shook her head.
I did ask you before to share some of your pain with me, didn't I? But it's hard knowing that you're intensifying your pain to keep me safe but far away. So that's why.
She smiled.
I may not be as strong as you, but I want to help. I want you to be happy, and not in pain.
Indecision flickered in his eyes.
Nina.
She ran a hand down his cheek.
If our roles were reversed, wouldn't you want to do the same? Yeah, I would.
Slowly putting his arm around her, he rested his head on her shoulder. Tears clouded her eyes, her heart felt so happy.
Oh, Ryu.
He was so tired. His shoulder felt heavy from the burden he carried. But Nina was here with him. His companions were here with him. He could relax. He had nothing to worry about. He smiled.
I'm glad you're here, Nina.
Ray whistled.
The brood are pretty amazing. Who would have thought they're still alive, living in a forsaken place like this?
Momo nodded.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to believe.
Both of them were on a particular high wall, watching the evening sky. In the distance, Pico seemed rather lost and unsure being in this gloomy village, unlike his usual cheerful self, and Honey, on his head, patted him in reassurance.
Gar must feel pretty bad now.
The engineer commented.
Yeah. I mean, being in a place, surrounded by people who used to be his enemies.
Ray sat up straight, his sharp eyes gazing into the distance.
He's over there, looking depressed. Let's go try to cheer him up.
She nodded without a word. Both of them stood up and, with Ray carrying Momo, leaped down from the rooftop. It was a short distance between them and where Gar was standing, gazing into the sky. Even with his calm expression, there was a hint of gloom on his face.
Hey, buddy,
the golden-haired man greeted. The Guardian did not even react. He seemed rather lost in his thoughts.
Gar.
Momo called. He turned slowly, glancing at them, before setting his eyes back on the sky.
Even if they have forgotten the war, I still remain the sworn enemy of every person in this village. They are suspicious of my presence, of the reason why Ryu brought me here with him.
No one said anything for a while. Tensed, Gar clenched his fists.
I came because I have lost my faith and have come to doubt my own actions of so long ago. But
he shook his head slowly.
I know it is a good enough reason not for them to trust me, for the war has ended not in the hearts and minds of these people.
Ray rubbed the back of his head.
Well, maybe so. But what are you getting all gloomy about?
He shrugged.
Okay, so maybe the people here want Ryu to take his power and go teach your goddess a thing or two, and maybe it's not so realistic to think we can drop in on the goddess and ask about the truth. But still, you're the one who told us to tag along if we wanted answers to our questions.
A glint of realization shone in the Guardian's eyes. He crossed his arms.
You know what? You just plain think too much, you know.
He relaxed a little.
Perhaps. Anyway, it doesn't matter what the villagers here think.
He grinned.
What's important is what Ryu thinks, right? Did someone mention my name?
Ryu asked, approaching them with Nina at his side.
Yeah, well.
The half-tiger shrugged.
I was trying to cheer this fella up.
Gar nodded, not looking quite as depressed now.
For that, I thank you, Ray. Hey, no prob.
At that moment, Grial approached them.
Lord Ryu,
he started, bowing slightly.
The elder wishes to meet with you. The elder?
The princess echoed. He nodded.
He is the eldest of us all. Of all the brood, only he remembers the Great War. I see.
Ryu straightened.
Where do I meet him?
He gestured down a particular street.
This way, Lord Ryu. You may come as well, noble companions.
The elder's residence was, unexpectedly, inside the well in the middle of the village. Climbing down the ladder, Ryu noted that there were only a few small puddles of water lying around the surface of the soil at the bottom, and there was another ladder that led to a platform. Upon stepping on the platform and climbing a short staircase, they found themselves in a long hallway, brightly lit by torches. One side of the hall was decorated with a long mural. On the left side, allied warriors of many races faced towards the right with their weapons drawn. On the right side of the mural, a gigantic serpent roared, the eyes on its 7 heads gleaming maliciously. Behind it was a glowing girl, her golden hair shining, a pair of white wings spread as clear as eyes could see. But the part that caught their attention most was a young man, dressed in half armor and clothes with a red cape that billowed around him. He stood confidently, facing the serpent and backed by his allies, with his shining sword raised into the air. What surprised his companions most was that this renowned warrior had shoulder-length blue hair, just like Ryu's.
This warrior,
the princess said thoughtfully.
He looks just like you, Ryu. Hey, look here,
Ray called from the other end of the mural, his voice filled with interest.
There's a winged girl here with blonde hair. Looks like you, Nina. What does this mean?
Momo wondered.
This is my first time seeing this mural, but...
The azure-haired man gazed intently at the mural, recognition gleaming in his blue eyes.
I recognize it. Have you seen a similar painting before?
Gar questioned. He shook his head.
No. It's not that. This is of my first life. The first time Miria broke free from her seal.
He glanced at all the warriors on the mural, and smiled slightly.
And I still remember my companions' names then, Bo, Karn, Gobe, Ox, and Mogo. Even Lady D's joined.
His smile grew fonder.
And of course, Nina.
The winged girl blushed, but did not reply. After that, however, Ryu's gaze hardened.
This serpent? It's actually not a real serpent.
He pointed at it.
You see, it has 7 heads. It represents the 7 people who worked together to release Miria's seal, and one of them was...
He trailed off, his eyes distant. No one answered.
Lord Ryu,
Grial called.
We should head inside. Oh, right.
The young man shook his head.
Sorry.
Beyond the long hallway was a large hall, much wider than the hallway they were in. The room was rather bare, with only stone designs of a dragon and bright torches on the wall and a raised stone platform on one end, where an old man sat. This old man was bald and rather thin, the ribs showing on his chest. The garments that he wore were more bizarre compared to those of the other villages. He merely wore a green cloth around his waist and a green cap on his head. Golden bangles jingled from his wrists and ankles, and the large golden earrings reflected the torch's light. Upon setting his eyes on the old man, however, Ryu's eyes widened.
Master Jono!
He exclaimed. The elderly man abruptly gave a huge guffaw.
Aha, so the prince has returned. How have you been, you little rascal? I'm good. What about you, Master Jono?
He scowled.
Peh. Don't call me Master Jono. You never change even after all those years.
He flinched as though he had been hit.
Sorry.
The others blinked, not quite knowing how to react to this strange exchange of greetings between the two. Seemingly satisfied from the apology, the old man looked around at the group.
So, these are your companions this time, eh?
Ryu nodded.
Yes.
Gesturing at them one by one, he introduced them.
This is Nina, and these are Ray, Momo, Gar, and Pico.
On the engineer's shoulder, Honey waved madly.
Ah, sorry, this is Honey.
Jono nodded thoughtfully.
I see.
Getting up from the stone platform, the elder waved Gree all out, who bowed and hastily left the hall. Jono approached the six of them, his eyes settling on the dragon's companions. Even as old as he was, he still stood straight, like an experienced, confident warrior. He spread his arms.
Welcome, all of you. I'm the Elder of Dragnir, Jono. During the Great War, I was Lord Ryu's right-hand general.
He grinned.
Don't let my looks fool you. I'm a nice guy. Right,
was Ray's reply, and the rest looked as doubtful as he sounded.
No doubt Lord Ryu told you, but...
Jono gestured towards the hall outside the room.
Did you all see the mural as you came in? That is the history of our people's struggle.
Turning around, he paced across the room as he spoke.
Our people's history stretches back to the distant past, even before the Great War. The history of a struggle against a great, recurring evil.
Ryu's expression was unreadable.
With each age, a warrior appears among the brood. With his allies, he carries on the struggle.
His gaze fell onto Ryu.
Against the evil that is named Miria.
Gar appeared tense.
Miria, the goddess of the Urkins. Of course, the Urkins never refer to their goddess or their enemy, the brood, by name.
Jono shook his head and sat back down on the stone platform.
Speaking of the Urkins, I want to talk to your friend, the Guardian.
Everyone's eyes stopped on Gar, who promptly advanced, his heavy footsteps audible. Jono gazed at him, though without hatred.
Guardian, I have to hand it to you Urkins. And to Miria. When you decided to get rid of the brood, you didn't hold back at all, did you?
He did not reply.
But you must realize one truth.
Raising a hand slowly, he continued.
As long as you refuse to speak your goddess name, or the name of your enemy, no one will ever know what became of us, or why. Oh, Honorable Elder One,
he blurted out, quite unlike his usual composed character.
Do you hate us? Hate?
He chuckled.
There are maybe some among us who do. But I do not, Guardian. One cannot allow himself to be blinded by hatred, or spill blood for a petty reason.
Despite what he said, sadness appeared on his deeply wrinkled face.
What happened between the Urkin and the brood was fate. Fate, Honorable Elder One.
Upon hearing that one word, it was as though a valve was unleashed within him, for he suddenly spoke loudly, demandingly.
What do you mean, Honorable Elder One? Please, tell me.
And Jono's demeanor changed as well, to that of a thoroughly annoyed old man.
Stop calling me Elder One. You're every bit as old as I am.
Shocked by this sudden outburst, Gar stepped back quickly, back among his companions. The old man crossed his arms indignantly.
I've had enough of talking to you. From now on, the only thing I want to see is a pretty girl, understand? I made up my mind, I'm only going to talk to the women.
An awkward silence hung in the air, with everyone staring at him disbelievingly. Ryu slapped his forehead in exasperation. Apparently Jono had not changed at all in 400 years. Ray then had an idea. With a cheeky grin, he crept behind Momo and gave her a strong push.
Ow! Hey!
She exclaimed. As soon as she regained her balance, however, she found that she was right in front of Jono, who immediately protested.
No 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 no!
He cried, waving his hand madly.
I said pretty girls. I want the young plump ones. Well, excuse me.
She scowled, crossing her arms.
What an old crank! What do you mean, I'm not good enough?
The half-tiger burst out laughing, holding his stomach, but he was immediately shut up after Momo whipped out her chrism-powered cannon and aimed it at him. As for the rest of them, all eyes fell onto Nina. Since the old man had rejected Momo, the only female left in the group was her. Gulping a little, she stepped forward, her white plumes trailing behind her. Upon looking at her, a satisfied grin formed on Jono's face.
Ah! Much better.
Leaning slightly forward, he spoke.
Now listen up, little lady. I'm going to tell you the story behind the first war between the brood and the goddess Miria.
The princess nodded.
I'm listening, Grandpa. Good girl. Now, listen closely.
He cleared his throat.
The brood and Miria have always fought. Down through the ages, and all across the world. No doubt it was she who descended from the heavens first for world domination, and we the brood followed after against her reign.
He shook his head sadly.
But even we are not the perfect role model. What do you mean, Grandpa? Some time after the first war was ignited, the goddess granted wishes. Good wishes, selfish wishes, she granted them all. And thus the people of the world began calling her the goddess of desire. They fought each other over the wishes, all for their own selfish reasons, and the goddess encouraged the fighting.
Surprised, she shook her head.
But wasn't she called the goddess of destruction? Why would they want to fight over someone who destroyed some of their cities? Yes. But it's not that simple, child.
He shook his head.
People are easily blinded. Even we, the ones who have come to oppose her, could not resist it. The Dark Dragon clan, finding our purpose meaningless, chose to take the goddess side in the war. I see. The war over the wishes has long ended. But the strife between the clans has not. Though we have all merged and renounced the division of clans, there are still some who shun those who are rumored to be descended from the dark dragons.
He sighed sadly.
Though the danger to the world might be us brood, our power is such that we could destroy the world. Miria feared that strength, and decided to destroy us.
She nodded once more, remembering what Ryu had told her.
It must be difficult, fighting a war and yet holding back your power. Yes. If we had done so, we might have indeed destroyed the world.
He paused for a while.
I want to tell you something important, so I want you to come up here, next to me. Will you do that?
She obeyed hesitantly, standing at his side.
Like this. That's it. Now, kneel down.
She knelt down, wondering what was up.
And give me a kiss. What?
She exclaimed, jumping back. Flustered, she turned towards her companions.
Ryu, what should I do?
Ryu shrugged uncertainly.
I don't know. Do what you feel like doing. Right? Okay.
She hesitated as she approached the elder again, kneeling beside him, and, after a brief pause, gave him a very light peck on his cheek.
Ho 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 ho!
Jono abruptly burst out laughing, making her jump back again.
I got my kiss, so now I've no regrets.
He let out another long guffaw and it took him quite some time to settle down, but once he did, he cleared his throat.
Now. It's time to do what I must. Lord Ryu.
Ryu nodded, stepping forward.
Yes, Master Jono. When you died unexpectedly 4 centuries ago.
He sighed sadly.
We thought we were done for.
Sorrowfully, Ryu bowed his head.
I'm sorry.
Though I still can't remember how I died then.
It's never your fault, Lord Ryu, it is fate. Nonetheless.
He shook his head.
After your untimely departure, your position was bestowed upon me, and I led the warriors against Miria. However, I did not fare well.
He gripped his fist tightly, a feeling of remorse tearing at his heart.
I see. It was by Lord Loudon's order, conveyed through Lady D's, that we gave up our power and returned to our homeland, here, now a lonely barren place. To hide that power from the prying eyes of the goddess. To fool Miria into thinking that she had succeeded in eradicating the brood. All this for me to return. Yes, Lord Ryu.
Shaking his head slowly, Jono stood up once more.
I don't know if our ruse worked, but we have guarded the essence of the brood all these years. The power that you have left behind all these years ago.
He placed a wrinkled hand on his chest.
Here, in me. The power that you left behind.
The princess looked puzzled.
What does it mean? Each time I die, I lose most of my power,
Ryu answered patiently.
So I can't unleash my full strength completely. What?
Momo cried.
You mean to say that you can get even more powerful than you are now?
Gar shook his head.
Such is the power of the brood. Truly unfathomable.
Jono spread his arms.
The brood. We have waited for this day. It's time for me to meet my end. And you, your fate.
He stepped forward, his eyes on Ryu.
Lord Ryu. Are you prepared?
Ryu nodded.
I'm ready.
Looking over his shoulder, he told the others,
please, everyone, leave this room. It'll be dangerous here. What? Why?
Ray demanded.
Because he'll be fighting me,
the old man stated.
There are special wards in this room, to guard against discovery by the goddess. So he'll be unable to transform.
The guardian nodded.
We understand. We will wait outside. Ryu.
Nina seemed a little worried.
Be careful, okay? Good luck.
Momo said.
Pooey.
Pico cried. Ray grinned.
Do your best, buddy.
At his friend's support, Ryu smiled.
Thanks, guys.
As agreed, the others left the room for the surface, though Nina paused to give him a reassuring smile. As soon as the door was shut, leaving both of them alone, Jono stepped down from the platform.
I'm sure you already know the process, Lord Ryu,
he said, a grim expression on his face. The Dragon Prince nodded.
A battle to the death, the victor gets the power.
He closed his eyes.
My human strength. Against your dragon form. Good, you still remember. Now, let's begin.
A strong burst of light filled the room, obscuring all sight. Ryu winced and drew back, shielding his eyes from the bright light, as a loud roar shook the walls. The moment the light dimmed, the elder was gone, and in his place was a great dragon, a form so big that it filled up a quarter of the hall. His head was bigger than that of the forest dragon, his blood-red fangs showing from his lips, his red horns curling upwards from his head. Red spikes trailed down his serpentine neck all the way to the tip of his tail. His limbs were muscular, filled with strength that had not faded with his age, and his large body was made for strength rather than speed. His bat-like wings, joined at the elbow of his front legs, had a beautiful, transparent purple color. The dragon inside Ryu stirred, aching to be released, but he couldn't tap into the power. He could feel the magical ward sealing it. I guess this is how the others feel when I transform, he thought wryly, as he drew his trusty long sword. Jono took a deep breath and roared, signaling the start of battle. The young man narrowed his eyes as he charged, his speed greater than that of an average human. His hands gripping the hilt of his sword tightly, he gave a cry as he swung his weapon in a horizontal slash, aiming for the chest. The blade merely created a shallow cut. The scales were like wards against his blade. The dragon growled, and a swift wave of orange-hot flames came from his open jaws, engulfing his target completely as it spread left and right like a curtain caught by a strong gale. Ryu gritted his teeth as he was forcefully thrown back against the stone wall, though the flames barely burned him. Jono ceased and gazed at him, as though mocking him. Ryu chuckled as he straightened back into a battle stance, his sword in front of him.
You never intended to go easy on me from the start, did you, Master Jono?
He suddenly lunged forward once more.
It's fine, that's how I prefer it.
The elder roared again, and sent another wave of flame breath, both clashing in the center. Nina was frantic. Even though the other 5 of them had to stay outside on the surface to wait for Ryu to return, it did not ease her worries at all. For the sounds of the great battle could be heard clearly. The great roar of a dragon, with the intent to kill. The sounds of a clashing sword against scales. Even if they could not watch, they knew it was a terrifying battle, with power that was completely beyond their level. A battle that lasted longer than their endurance would allow. As time passed, Nina grew frantic. There were times she wanted to run to Jono's residence and stop the battle, to save Ryu from being hurt, but she restrained herself, telling herself that it was part of his duty. But by the 3rd sunset, she was worried out of her mind.
I'm going down,
she declared, standing up. To her surprise, the others followed suit.
Me too,
Momo cried.
Pyukyo,
Pico joined in.
It's gone long enough,
Ray snarled. Gar nodded.
Let us go.
At first they walked, climbing down the ladder that led into Jono's residence, but by the time they reached the hallway with the mural, they broke into a run, pulled by a strong feeling of panic. As soon as they burst into the room, they were just in time to see a bright light engulfing the room, forcing them to shield their eyes. When the light dimmed enough for them to see, they found that Jono was back in his human form, breathing hard, with bloody wounds all over his skinny body. And the princess gasped as soon as she set her eyes on Ryu. The dragon prince was kneeling on the floor, one shaky hand gripping the hilt of his sword for support. His skin were red from being burned, his blood dripping from where his clothes were torn with sharp claws, and he was panting heavily for breath.
Ryu!
Nina exclaimed. Ryu turned sharply.
And Nina?
The elder chuckled.
Worried, aren't you? We've just finished a long battle.
He then collapsed backwards into a sitting position.
Master Jono!
He shouted, and mustered all of his strength to move to the old man's side.
Very good, Lord Ryu.
He nodded his approval.
You haven't lost your touch at all.
He shook his head.
I hope I didn't hurt you too much.
He gave a sudden guffaw.
Damn it, Lord Ryu. How are you going to fight with that kind of attitude?
He shook his head.
But that's a good quality of yours. Master Jono. Listen to me now, Lord Ryu.
Jono raised a shaky hand, placing them into Ryu's.
This is the power that can shake the very foundation of the world, your true power, the power which the goddess rightly fears. It's in your hands now. Yours, and your friends.
Us. Ray muttered.
Always, you have fought with your allies. Your friends. To defeat the goddess. But.
He placed the other hand on Ryu's shoulder.
You needn't follow that path anymore, if you so choose. The power is yours, after all. Do with it what you will.
The body of the elder, now much frailier looking compared to his dragon form, began glowing. The young man's eyes widened.
Master Jono. You've made this old man happy by giving a chance to see you again.
He gave a serene smile.
Farewell, Lord Ryu. Blood of my blood.
Without warning, another bright light filled the room as his body vanished, blinding everyone in sight. Ryu gasped as he felt a burst of energy from within him, burning him like an internal fire forcing its way out. He screamed loudly, his voice turning into a great roar, as his body transformed. His companions stared at him in awe. An elegant dragon, a graceful dragon. His serpentine neck and tail arched like a snake, his horns glowed like a golden crimson jewel. His muscular body shone its own brilliant golden light, his legs made for speed on land and his wings for air. His wings, a golden limb tipped with a great golden crimson claw, attached to a pair of feathered wings made entirely of shining light. And his blue eyes shone. The Kaiser Dragon. The most magnificent of all dragons. The symbol of hope, to the end of the war. Shining brightly, he threw his head upward and gave a mighty roar, shaking the very walls of the room. A roar that conveyed the very power of the brood, the very power that could destroy the world. The very power that the goddess feared. Then, his mind finally realized the exhaustion that his body felt. All too suddenly, his glowing body reverted to his human form, and, to his companion's horror, collapsed limply onto the stone floor.
Ryu!
Nina screamed. End of chapter.